Hey y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop. We are going to be having a good bit of fun today. We are trying to play with this live stream format a little bit more, and I think what it's leaning towards is doing a lot more joinery and some of the basic steps. So in today's video, we're going to be going over cutting a groove, but we're not going to be using a grooving plane, a plow plane, or a rabbiting plane, or even a hand router. So these things, even though like this one, when I first got started, this is one of the first tools I made. I made it out of a block of firewood. It probably took me about 2.5 hours, and I used an old chisel, and I had a plow plane. They're really not that hard to make at all. And being one of the first things I ever made with hand tools, I do have a video on that if you go all the way back in the archives. Be warned, the video is not all that good. But making a plow plane is not that hard, especially a dedicated one like this that's a 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch, the most common groove you're going to make. Making one is really nice because anytime I can just reach around and grab this, cut a groove, and I'm done. This is so much faster than setting up a router and a lot more fun. So we're not going to be using these today. I want to be showing how to do it with just a saw and a chisel. It's kind of scary and daunting to some people because a handsaw is, it can be hard to control. And so you have a fear of going off the line. But if you slow down and you take it step by step, you can find that this is actually pretty accurate and not that hard to use. And practicing once or twice, you can cut a groove or a dado with a handsaw and a chisel. That's the fun part. So let's actually dive into it. And I've got this piece of white oak that we're going to be using it. I know a lot of people will show videos on making things and they'll use things like pine or poplar and they'll choose the easy woods. Not here. Here we choose white oak. Stringy, hard, and painful. So if you can do it in white oak, you can do it just about anything. I was going to grab a piece of hickory, but the white oak was a little closer and there's really not that much difference when you come to a cut like this. So I'm going to set that in the vise and let's get started.
It was a little closer, says the man who just ran 50 miles.
What?
I said it was a little closer, says the man who just ran 50 miles.
I get lazy with like 3 feet apart, but you know, 50-mile run, no problem.
Uh-oh, Bill says our sink's off.
Yeah, I'll turn it away from my face so you don't have to see that. Let me, where is it? There it is. Did that just switch over, babe?
Yeah.
Cool. I didn't see it click. So there, you won't have to see my face anymore because the sink gets off and I have to figure out what's up with that. So we need to cut a groove in this board, and I'm going to randomly pick a spot. I'm going to set a marking gauge on here, and I'm going to mark one side of the wall. And so if this is a 1/4 by 1/4, I'd mark a 1/4 inch in, and then I'd come back and I'd mark another one a 1/2 inch in. But in this case, I'm just going to pick 2 random sizes, and I'm going to draw 2 random lines. Let's make it like that, because I can make random sizes and lines. Let me just see if my chisel will fit inside there. No, it won't. So make it a little bigger. That's one of the things you need to pick is your groove size cannot be any, went the wrong way. Your groove size cannot be smaller than the chisel you have unless you have a smaller chisel. Let's see, how does that one fit? Perfect. Perfect. So let's cut that second line here. And so that's where we're going to have a groove. Random size, random amount, don't really care about it. Now, most people, when they first want to cut a groove, the easiest thing they're going to want to do is set up a fence. And a fence can often just be a board set on the line that your saw lies around. So I'm going to show one side with the fence and one side without it. And I'm just going to use a couple clamps to hold it in place. Let me switch to the other side.
All right, second camera's a little bit off focus, they say.
This one?
I'm guessing.
Let me see. Oop. Hey. That should do a little bit better. Try that. Does that look better to you?
I don't know. Looks a little grainy still.
Okay. There, that should be a lot better. Otherwise, I might turn this one off and turn it back on. See if I can get any better. If it's still a problem, let me know. So I'm going to clamp these fences on here. Clamp this fence on here. Clamp these clamps on here. Only one clamp, only one fence, 2 clamps. And then this gives me a block that I can very easily just set the saw against and not have to think much. I just want to make sure I run the saw all the way through. Because if you're just doing one area like this, I'm going to load these teeth up with sawdust, and the sawdust is going to jam up the saw. But if I go all the way through, then it has a chance to discharge the sawdust on both ends. Does it still go out of focus?
Nope, better.
Cool. So I'm going to go this down to a random depth, and occasionally the dust still kind of clogs up, and it's nice to wipe it off and everything. But then we can just go to town. Kind of like a rabbiting saw or a kerf saw. And there, I'm down a little over 1/4 inch on the front. On this side, I'm only down about 1/8 inch. So I'm going to focus on cutting this other side over here. Take it all down to an even depth. Don't really care what the depth is. If I did, I would put a stop mark on either end. Let's see where we're at. A little bit more. And I'm starting with the toe in here, kind of scratching a little bit, and then as I get in there, I'm engaging, and I'll engage the back here once it passes the end, so that it's starting to engage fully about this point, so I'm not cutting too much deeper here.
All right, DarthDweeb has a question.
What's that?
Was the fence set up right to the line?
Yes, I have the fence dead on the line, on the outside of the line. So if you see that the marking gauge mark is like a 1/64 of an inch wide, I have it on the outside of the line. So the outside of the cut will be the fence itself. So get it as close to that as you can, because we're not going to clean up that cut. Whatever's left over from the saw is what we have in the groove. There. Now I'm about 1/4 inch deep all the way along this. And if I put it in here, I'm going to try and rock the saw side to side. If it rocks, that means there's a belly in the middle, and I need to come in and toe clean out. If it doesn't rock, like this, it's nice and solid. We have a nice clean cut all the way across. But a fence is such a power tool thing. You set up fences, you set up jigs, you set up things like that, and really, you don't need to waste your time with a fence. It's not that much harder to do this without. What we can do is become Paul Sellers, grab a chisel and make a knife wall, and I'm going to do this other one with that. So I'm just going to take out a little bit along here, and this knife wall just creates a small little gouge for the saw to fit in, so it doesn't want to bounce out as easily. You can do it without this, it just takes a little bit more practice. But making a knife wall here makes it a lot easier. So I'm just cutting back at an angle to the marking gauge line. Only like a 32nd of an inch deep. We can get rid of that string all the way along. And now I have this little groove that the saw can fit in. Let me zoom in a little bit and see if you can see this better. See if that helps you at all. And a little bit up here. There, that should be good. And so for this, what I want to do is put the saw in here, and I'm just going to set it in that groove, and I'm going to very, very lightly and easily move it across all the way from one side to the other. Now let me back up and show you a little bit different. What I don't want to do is I don't want the saw to be perfectly vertical at this point. I actually want to lean it into that kerf a little bit so that I'm using the side of the teeth. So rather than being vertical like this, I'm going to lean it out away from it just for a pass or two. This just gives it a little bit finer of a control, and I find it easier to ride in that mark with that. Once I have this established a little bit, and I've done about 1.5 passes to 2 passes like that, then I'm going to set this up vertical. Uh-oh, my wife's laughing at something.
Blēkat Woodworks says, does James always do things the hardest way possible?
Yes, of course. And so once I have this established, then I can bring the saw up vertical, just do a pass or 2 in here, and now I have basically a fence created, so I can cut freehand and just eyeball the saw being vertical. Move that out of the way. And do the exact same thing I just did with the fence, only do it without a fence. This is one of the tricky things, that your hand tends to wobble like this, and as it gets deeper and deeper, if it wobbles too far, the saw will jam. And so it just takes a little bit of time, skill, and practice. You'll see me jam occasionally. Not a huge issue, just keep going. Let's see, getting close to depth on this end. Let's see how we are on this end. About halfway over there. So let's focus again on the far side. Keep going too fast, you can see it jamming up at the end there. I'll be wobbling and it catches here, so this saw out there wiggles.
So Bill K wants to know about the saw that you're using.
This is a Veritas back saw. This is a tenon saw that they have. This is a beat up one. I have a little bit of a kink here. The saw plate itself is fairly straight. I bent that back out. So it's like $75 brand new. This one I got for $25 because it had a broken bit here, and then I went and kinked it because the bit was broken. But it still works well. But it is a rip cut tooth, and I don't remember what the TPI in this one is. It's like around a 10, 12 TPI. So it's fairly fine, but a rip cut because I'm going with the grain. And the nice thing about this particular method is a groove runs with the grain, a dado runs across the grain, and if I were to cut a dado on this, I could do the exact same thing, either with a fence or with a knife wall and start it. It doesn't matter whether you're going with the grain or across the grain. It's just if I'm going across the grain, I'd probably pick one with a crosscut set, but if you don't have it, then you don't need it. A rip tooth just makes it a little bit easier to rip with, but nothing necessary. Looks about right there, looks about right there. Then we put it back in there and we see if there's any rock side to side, and we don't have any rock. Again, if I did have a rock, it would mean it'd be high in the middle. And so I basically just come in with either the toe or the heel and just kind of sand out the middle a little bit and kind of scratch that out until I got it flat. So there we have the hard part done. That's the part that a lot of people fear. And now we can move on to what is the fun part. And so I'm just going to set this in here. I'm going to go halfway down. And I'm going to run in. Because I'm right here at the end, I'm going to do it bevel up. And I'm only going to do this bevel up for a little bit. Right up to about there. What's that?
Question from Hesham Hafez, if I said that right. What's the difference between groove and dado?
I think I just said that, but groove runs with the grain, and a dado runs across the grain. So it's kind of semantics. They're basically the same thing. It's just a groove is far easier to cut because you can cut that with a very simple plow plane. Whereas a dado, if you take this plane and you run across the grain, you're going to get a lot of tear out. In which case you need nickers or spurs on the side to cut the grain on either side first. But if you're cutting with a saw, there really isn't that much difference. So once I've gone in a little ways, I'm going to turn the chisel over, bevel down. That's one of the big differences between a power tool person and a hand tool person is that, let me zoom in just a hair and let you see this a little closer. For some reason, well, not for some reason, it makes more sense to use a chisel bevel up because you're pushing in line with the direction you're cutting. But you get far more control if you turn around and bevel down. And so for the hand tool person, it's a little more natural to turn it bevel down. And I'm going to be basically aiming up. I don't want to be aiming down. I want to take off a little bit at a time. So if I were aiming flat, I would be running this at the angle of the bevel. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower this down a little bit so I'm basically cutting up at an angle. So you can cut up even though you're all the way down in here. And then just clean it out. And this is indeed the fun part. Because it's not easy to mess up unless you go too fast or too wild. Which I'm going fairly fast, which I might mess up, which always makes a fun video. But you can see how running with the grain just makes this really, really easy and simple. So I'm going to stop there, but basically if you cut down to the depth on either side of the saw, you just cut down until you can't see the saw marks inside anymore. And so for cleaning it up, I'm just going to use this little stabbing motion. Makes it really easy to clean up the bottom until I can't see the saw marks anymore at the bottom. And that is a groove, which, let's see, we are 15 minutes into this video. Even with the talking and shooting, we made a groove. And it's really that fast and easy, even in white oak. And you can get really, really picky about how clean and smooth the bottom is. Most of the time you don't need to be, because there's going to be some other piece of wood sliding in there.
Some people are losing feed. Some people are losing feed.
I don't know. How's it feed saying on the support on the far right?
Mama just said video gone. Mama said it.
Let me try this. 2.
Well, it's half the people.
Am I back to this camera?
It's kind of 50-50. All right.
Let me turn around and go look at the camera. Look at the computer. I want to see what this is saying. It says good. Okay. Yeah. If you lose feed, it's something to do with the stream in between. Sorry about that. Am I on the overhead camera?
No, I don't think so.
Which camera am I on?
You're close in.
The close
I only
in?
see your hand.
Move back to 2. Hey, there we go. So yeah, if you lose feed, then you can restart it. It's probably something with the stream. Sorry about that. But there's a reason I'm recording this whole thing so you can see it. So yeah, a groove. 15 minutes, not that hard to do. Now, since this went so quickly, we're going to do something that's a little bit more fun. I had a request on the Wood by Wright Hive Mind not that long ago, which, if you haven't seen the Wood by Wright Hive Mind, it's kind of the group on Facebook that I go to and I ask questions about, what would you like to see me do? I'm thinking about doing this video or thinking about using this thumbnail, and I can kind of bounce ideas off of that. So if you want to be a part of that, search for Wood by Wright Hive Mind, and you can ask to join in there. But I had someone say, how do you make a curved groove? Yes, this is a nice straight groove and it's very easy, but what do you do if you want the groove to curve? Like, say, on the grooves of a roll top desk. How in the world would you make those with hand tools? With a power tool, it's fairly easy. You set up a guide for a router and you route a curve, just like you would set up a guide for a straight line and you would route a straight line. It's the exact same thing with a router. But with hand tools, so let's dive in and take a look at that. Clamp this back up. I'll switch back over to the other camera here. There we go. And first we have to start lining things up. So let's pick a radius point. So normally you would have picked a radius of 10 inches, 18 inches, whatever it is you're going to be curving. But in this case, I'm going to pick a radius point of here. I don't care what this is because I'm just demonstrating. And that is the point at which I set my compass. So I want this to go from here, which is right on the inside line, and I'm going to draw that line. And then I want to move it out to the outside line.
So you're saying math is actually useful?
Yes, geometry is a fun sport. Geometry is a fun sport. And then I'm going to draw the outside line here. And so we're going to cut a groove that curves rather rapidly. And if I were to have made this a stop groove, basically the way I would have cut it stop is, number one, I would chisel out a stop, or in this case I would have chiseled out the stop here because this groove would curve around. And then I would saw through at an angle, so I would be to depth here, and then I wouldn't be touching the wood here. And then chisel out everything in between there. For the curve, all we're going to be using is chisels because that don't work. So let me grab my carving tools here, and we're going to play with this a little bit. So if you've never gotten into carving, this is actually a good opportunity, because a lot of times the hand tool answer to how do you do something is you drop a knife on the floor like I just did. The hand tool answer to something is you just carve it. For some reason, and I have to say I have a problem with this as well, because carving seems really scary because it's completely freehand. There are no jigs for carving. There are no shortcuts to it short of a CNC. It's just you and a chisel and a mallet, and you have to carve it. And that seems really scary. It's not, though. It's really fun. Yes, you're going to mess up. Yes, your first few attempts will not be perfect, but they'll be passable. They'll be functional, and they will work. And your next attempt will be a little bit better. Your next attempt will be a little bit better. And if you dive into it with that understanding of, yeah, it's not going to work the first time, but it can get better, and it will get better, and it's not as difficult as you want it to be, as difficult as you expect it to be, your first attempt will be functional. And have a little bit of fun with it. So we're going to grab, now I have a whole roll here of chisels, and then I have a whole other pile over there, and that seems scary, but really all you need are 2 chisels. Number one, you need a gouge that kind of closely matches your line. So if you have a curve, you're going to want something that has a curve similar to that, or a curve that is tighter than that, because you can always make it cleaner. Then you're also going to need a bench chisel, something that you can clean out the groove. And you want it to be thinner than the groove so you can actually get down in there. So, yeah, let's dive in. Where did I put that clicker? There it is. Back to 1. Why is my wife laughing at me?
Because Carey decided that carving barefoot would be a great idea and dropped a knife. Sounds like something. Well, no, you wouldn't do that because you have your wooden clogs.
Yeah, that's.
It's fashionable and it is practical.
I used to use sandals, but you know, I wanted to do clogs for a while. So these are my shop shoes, and yes, I wear them every day in the shop, and yes, they are comfortable. I want to do a video someday actually carving out everything. I did the carving the outside in a previous video, but they're really comfortable shop shoes. So let's come on over to this. Let's zoom in a little bit over here so you can see this a little bit better. One of these days I'm going to get a third camera in here so I can show this a little more often. Zoom in a little more. There we go. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I want to stay away from the lines, and I'm going to put this in here. Now this chisel is a lot tighter of a curve than the curve of this groove. So I'm going to set it in here away from the line a little ways. I'm just going to tap it. And then I'm going to come over here a little ways away from the line, tap it. And at this point, with this kind of groove, you could probably just use a bench chisel, something flat. Actually, let me see. Let me grab my 1/2-inch chisel and show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to use a 1/2-inch chisel. I'm going to stay away from the line. Just chop down a little ways. I'm basically creating a stop cut so that when I clean out between these, I'm not going to be blowing out past that line. And there. So this is going to take longer than the straight cut, but that's because it's more complex and it's more fun. Let me switch out. This one's a little bit quieter. Or at least it seems quieter to me. It's a little more deeper of a thud. But this is the type of thing that I love because I can turn on the music I want or an audio book and just kind of zen out and have some fun going back and forth. And so it's going to be a lot of chop out, clean out, chop out, clean out. And this will probably end up taking, I'm guessing 30, 40 minutes to cut this groove out. But when you're done, you'll be able to show this to people and go, I did that with hand tools. I carved that groove. I think that's the reason why I do ultramarathons. I ran 50 miles. No, I'm not conceited. Just ask my wife. So I guess if anyone has any questions, now might actually be a good time because I'm going to be going through this a little slower.
So there was a question earlier about a coping saw.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, what about a coping saw from, who said that?
Dakota.
Asked about that.
What about the coping saw?
I don't know if a coping saw would help with the curved line. I don't know. You're asking the wrong person to interpret.
Oh, for cutting the curve. Yes, you could cut it, but the problem is if you want, what you could do is you could cut the board, resaw it, cut the groove out with a coping saw, and then glue them back down. But if you just want to create a groove with a flat bottom, a coping saw won't get in there. Man, let's carve this.
How do you sharpen your carving gouges?
I strop them. I do not let them get dull, so that I can hit them with a leather and a strop and clean them up. And like most of the time, I'm going to have a strop lying around here on the bench, so I can clean up the inside and then kind of clean up the outside and have a bit flexible in here. And I'll keep it sharp just with a few strokes like that every 5 to 10 minutes worth of carving. Going a little too deep.
All right. So
you can see I'm basic.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So you can see I'm basically carving it out. I'm going to do this one more time where I'm going to chop in, go down a little deeper, and then clean that out. And I'll show you how to clean the groove a little bit. What you got, babe?
So Thomas Russell wants to know, why not set the lines with a V groove tool?
You could. Personal preference. I prefer to chop down with this rather than a V tool, but a V tool would work, especially if you're into like artistic carvings and things like that. A lot of the lines commonly done with that are started with a V tool. But I'm cutting in a straight groove, so I'm kind of treating this more like cutting a mortise than cutting some artistic drawing. Hope that answers your question. All comes down to personal opinion, which is one of the great things about this sport, is that there are 1,000 ways to do any particular step. You can, you could do this a crazy bunch of different ways, from a hand router to, carving it completely organically and shaped in weird ways. I guess if you wanted to, you could actually create a curved saw to do this. And there is no right or wrong way as long as you're doing it safely. And even safely is kind of open to interpretation.
Yes, it is.
What are you laughing about?
You and safety. Anyways, so back to taking steps, and we have the question of, what shoes did you wear for the ultramarathon?
I wore the Hoka One Speed Goat 2. They are really comfortable and cushiony. I also have a pair of Saucony Peregrines that I run with, but most of my long runs are done with the Speed Goats.
Woodworking is a sport. Where do you compete?
Woodworking is a sport, what?
That's because DarthDweeb says, woodworking is a sport? Where do you compete? And that's because you make everything a competition.
Yes.
And you wonder where your son gets it from.
The sport is a lot like the sport of ultramarathon. You are not competing against other people. You're competing against yourself. Are you going to be the person who quits and gives up? Or are you going to be the person that endures and gets through it and completes the race? And I find that to be very similar. So once I've actually cut down, I'm going to imagine that I've cut this down to depth. And now I'm going to come in here with a chisel, and I'm going to go right to that line. And I'm just going to take small bites off of it and clean it out right down to that line. And this is where a really nice sharp chisel is incredibly handy, because I'm just pushing with it my hands. If it's a little duller, I'd have to use a mallet. And I don't normally like to chop with my chisels, with my carving chisels. So this is what I find to be really fun. So here on the outside, I'm going to be using this curved gouge. It allows me to get close to it, and you can see how this gouge is actually, it's a smaller radius than the radius I'm working on. So I'm just taking it little bit by little bit until I chop down. And I've had a lot of people ask me, what chisels do I use? What carving chisels do I use? I use a lot of Pfeffel or Peffel, or however you want to pronounce it, and 2 Cherries. I think 2 Cherries is my go-to starter set. It tends to be a little cheaper, but still having really good quality. And most of mine are 2 Cherries. I do have a link to all of the chisels I use on my website. Sorry if my chin is hitting my microphone. I just realized that. Kind of happens when I bend over like this. Any questions, babe?
Sorry, we were talking about OJ.
Orange juice?
Yes, because the duck said last time you were sick, you said that I said that drinking OJ was bad, and I said it's not bad. I just can't imagine doing that with a super inflamed throat.
Yes.
Because, water isn't like the most essential thing. Your body isn't 55 to 60% water. But anyways. But we know James. He likes pain. So that's why OJ works for him.
Yeah.
Oh, we got honey and lemon. Yes. That would be good, too, with some tea.
There. And now for the inside here.
Available. What?
I'm not going to use the inside of the gouge because it just won't match up. I'm going to use the flat gouge, or my flat gouge. Eat a flat gouge. I've got to use that one more often. This is a bench chisel, just a flat half-inch normal bench chisel, purchased from Aldi, the grocery store. And I'm going to come in here and just come close to that line. Actually, I'm going to go right into that line. And you can see I'm just taking little bite by little bite, rocking it in, and chopping it out close to that line. Any questions, babe?
Well, Joshua said that when plowing, you said the bed of the groove isn't as important. What about hand carving? Are you more concerned in this region, or do you really care?
It depends on the use of it. If it's going to be a groove that is seen, like in a roll-top desk, when you roll the desk back and you see the groove, then I would probably care about it quite a bit, and I would spend my time flattening it out. And so I'd be coming in like this with the bevel down and the chisel, and I'll just do the same stabbing motion, but each time I'll come through, I'll take it a little bit lighter and lighter and basically scrape out the bottom. And if I really wanted to, I would actually create an individual card scraper that I could actually scrape and clean out the bottom with that. But most of the time, grooves are not seen. So it really doesn't matter as long as they're smooth enough for whatever's going to be sliding or housing in them. If you're talking about a drawer bottom, then it's not sliding at all, so there really isn't any issue at all with it being smooth or not. And just like that, we have a groove. And it's a rounded groove going all around. I didn't take it down to the same depth here. I'm about a little over halfway down to depth of this one. So I'd be basically doing the exact same thing, chopping in, going around, chopping in, and cleaning it down. So I hope this kind of answered a few questions for you. And I do want to say thank you to the Hive Mind for giving me this idea. I do want to do more videos like this in the future and kind of play through things. So I figured for the rest of this, probably be another 15 minutes or so. So if anyone has any questions or Q&A, now might be a good time to answer those. So go ahead and let my wife know, and she'll try and figure out what the questions are.
All right, we have a question for, sometimes that's hard to decipher. For a beginner with a limited budget, I'm sure you've answered this, the most essential plane one should have.
I have a video on beginner tools, so feel free to go check that out, and I actually go through the tools from the most essential tool to the least essential tool. The most essential tool, in my mind, if you have to have one tool, it's a half-inch chisel. You can create almost anything with a half-inch chisel. It's a really, really versatile tool. Between a half-inch and a quarter-inch, those two tools they can complete just about any project out there. That being said, for planes, either a number 4 or a number 5. Now, the numbers really kind of get people confused and messed up. Basically, the only difference between the number 4 and the number 5 is that the number 5 is longer and the number 4 is shorter. Other than that, they're basically identical. The reason they're shorter and longer matter is that a longer plane will flatten out a board. So if it's touching the wood here and touching the wood here and not touching the wood by the mouth, then when it slides over, it's not going to be cutting anything until it gets to that high spot, and then it will cut the high spot down. So you can naturally flatten out a board very easily with a longer sole. The problem with that is when you're finishing a board and you're trying to smooth it out and get everything perfect and ready for finish, a lot of times you have just these problem areas that you want to just hit the problem areas. And if you're using a longer sole, you can't just hit the problem area, you have to hit the whole board and then run into the chance that you're going to create a new problem area somewhere else. Whereas with a shorter number 4 or number 3, then you're not as long, and so it can hit a lot of those low spots. So you can just focus on that one spot, smooth that one spot out. And that's where a smoothing plane really comes in handy. It's a little shorter, and it will allow you to detail spot and smooth out the board. And so having the number 4 or the number 5, if I had to pick one of the two, I'd pick the number 4. Because you can still flatten large boards with a number 4. You just have to use something else to tell you where it's high and where it's low, a straight edge or lines. You can flatten a board with a number 4. So if you have to pick a number 4 or a number 5, I'd probably pick the number 4. But the number 5 is really useful because the joining capabilities of it and functionality, you can still smooth with this, and you can still do a pretty decent job. So it depends on what you're going to be doing. If you're doing a lot of smaller stuff, number 4 definitely. If you're doing a lot of bigger things, tabletops and whatnot, number 5 definitely. At least that's my personal opinion. Everyone's going to have a slightly different opinion. What else we got?
All right. How long have you been a carpenter, James?
Since I could walk. When I was 5, my dad started woodworking. Well, even before that, we were building a house, or remodeling a house, and so I helped him with that. But I've been in a wood shop since I was 5 years old. Hand tools is a more recent thing. I only picked that up about 3 years ago now. So just hand tools is a new thing. But woodworking is my life at one point or another, in one form or another.
All right. I'm going to butcher this name. Theophae? I don't know.
Hey, I'm not the only one who butchers names.
Are you planning to make a video on furniture conception?
Design is probably my weak point in furniture and building. I would love to, but it's not something that I really grasp well. For me, I haven't even landed on a design that I really like. I mean, I love mission style simplicity and functionality and seeing the joinery. And I also love the organic nature of Japanese woodworking. But Japanese and mission style are like polar opposites. And how do you combine the two? I tend to focus more on functionality and then pick a style that happens to fit the functionality that I'm aiming for. So I'm not a design person. I'm sorry, I just don't. I don't pick that very much. Sometime in the future, I will probably have a design that I really like, and I'll have a reason for it. But I just haven't gotten there yet. So sorry.
All right. How about what's the difference between jack plane and scrub plane?
Well, a jack plane traditionally is a number 5. It is the jack of all trades. It can smooth, it can joint. It's kind of the plane that people said, this should be your first plane because it's the one that can kind of do everything. And because of that, it's probably the most common plane out there. So jack refers to this style of plane. A scrub plane, originally what would happen is you would get a smoothing plane like this, or a slightly longer wooden body plane, and over time and flattening the sole, the mouth would open up and get really big. And once the mouth gets too big, it can't be used as a smoothing plane. It doesn't even work as a decent surfacing plane because the mouth is so large that it allows chips to curl out. So what they would do is they would put a large camber on the iron and they would turn it into a scrub plane. And that large camber on the iron would take a dished cut out of the wood, and it allows you to cut very deeply, very quickly. And with a single pass, you can take a 1/16 off, or in some woods, a full 1/8 off with a heavily cambered blade. And allows you to munch through material and get you close to flat very quickly, and then you can come into the other planes and flatten out all the grooves made by the scrub plane. That being said, Stanley then came out with a plane called the scrub plane. And it was a little bit shorter than a number 5. It was narrower, and it had none of the features. It was just a simple blade that you could tap around and hammer into what you needed. A very, very simple tool, but did the scrub work. But why actually go out and buy a plane specifically designed for that? And so what most people do is they end up taking a number 5 or number 4, and in this case, this is my scrub plane. and doing basically what they used to do with the old wooden planes is you take the iron out and you put a big camber on it, and then you open up the mouth a little bit larger so it can allow a larger chip to come through it. And then you've got a scrub plane. And because you can pick these up so cheap, I mean, like this one, I think I paid like $2 or $3 for this, and it was a rusted pile of junk. It doesn't matter its quality. It doesn't matter if the sole is pitted. It doesn't matter if it's missing some of the pieces. You can still turn it into a scrub plane. So that's why a lot of people will take the junk planes that are good for nothing else and turn them into a scrub plane, which makes it a functional, usable tool. And even like going and buying the Harbor Freight planes brand new or ones from the big box store, you can turn those into a scrub plane too, because they're really not good for general planing work. But for a scrub plane, it doesn't need accuracy, it doesn't need functionality, it just needs to be a plane with a big mouth and a cambered iron that can hog off material. And because of that, a lot of people kind of give the scrub plane a kind of looking down at like, it's kind of a subclass plane. But really, it's one of the most important planes because it's the first plane to touch the wood. It's the first plane to really get you close to it. And if you treat your scrub plane well, you can do 99% of all your wood movement removing with the scrub plane so that you can just come in with a smoothing plane and touch it up. Makes it really fun. What else you got?
All right. So Hesham wanted me to try to pronounce that name. I think I got it right. He was going to ask that question. It's Thomas Russell. He's got, I'm sure, a very serious question for you. How long would you estimate it would take you to build a timber frame barn with a 1/2-inch chisel, including felling the tree?
It would take a while. It would take a while, but hey, that sounds like a video I would take on.
After running.
Yes, yeah. Let me go run a few hundred miles, and then I'll attack the barn. Let me at it. Who needs a 1/2-inch chisel? I'm going to go get a stone and nap it and use that for my chisel. What else you got? What's that?
Sorry, I'm trying to get caught up on the chat.
Oh.
They're losing me. Avoid splitting with softwoods. Any tips? And then Make Brooklyn ask, when is it splitting?
When working with soft woods, particularly like if I'm chopping with a chisel, in hardwoods, it's fairly easy because you're only going to chop down so far. But in softwoods, if you hit it too hard, you're going to slide a long way down into the wood. And because of that, there's a lot more force down at the bottom and things are working around, and you tend to then crush fibers. Or they are so soft that they split and tear out. And so the two most common problems with soft wood is because you can dive in and hit it hard, people want to hit it hard and dive in. With soft wood, you have to really back up, get a lighter mallet, get a lighter touch, and just take off little bit by little bit, and that does a lot. Number two is that contrary to what your brain will tell you, your chisel needs to be sharper for softwood than it does for hardwood. You give me a dull chisel and I can chop into hardwood and still not crush it and cause problems. But with softwood, you've got to be really, really sharp or you're going to be crushing the wood when you're chopping into it. So yes, softwood is easier to plane, it tends to be easier to work, it's easier to carve in, but in some cases, if you're really looking for that clean, smooth look, softwoods can be a very difficult thing. And that's why for hand tools, the butter zone is something like a cherry or a walnut. It's still somewhat hard, still somewhat functional, but yet it's smooth enough that you can carve and plane. It feels like butter, and you don't have to worry about busting the fibers as much. So that's why a lot of hand tool people love walnut and cherry. Not to mention they look good. What else you got?
He clarified it with softwood joints. I don't know if that changes your answer at all.
Not really.
Okay.
If that doesn't answer your question, go ahead and ask a little bit more detailed, or feel free to send me an email. And if any of you do want to contact me, I have a contact form on my website. So feel free to do that, and I try to answer all those questions within a day or two.
All right. So Alan asked, what is your opinion on Western push saws versus Japanese pole saws?
Ooh, we're getting divisive here. Okay, let's do this.
You don't ever mind controversy.
So, Western saw, you push on the cut. Eastern saw, you pull on the cut. Which is better? You're going to have a lot of people who are saying, oh, the Japanese method, they fine-tune everything and they know the best possible way. And there are many benefits to having a pole saw. Number one, the plate can be thinner. Number two, you don't have to have as much set. Number three, they are harder to control, which sounds like a problem, but for a beginner, being harder to control makes them much, much easier to use. And let me explain that, because as you're pulling through the wood, the leading edge of the cut is on the other side of the wood from you. So you can't steer this side of the blade. You're only steering the side of the blade that's coming out of the wood. And so because of that, in order to steer it, you got to put a lot of force into the saw if you want to turn it. And the problem with most people when they're beginning, especially with a Western saw, because the steering side of the saw is on your side, just a little bit of movement and that saw will turn and cut. That being said, when you're first getting started, your general problem is over control, is that you start to see it going on the line and you try to veer it back, but you put so much force into it that the saw goes way over on the other side of the line. And then you try to steer it back and it goes way over on the other side of the line. With a Japanese saw, you really don't have that much problem. As long as you set it up straight, it's going to track straight if the saw is any good. So for learning, a Japanese saw can be very useful. One of the problems that a lot of other people have is that they take a completely different body mechanic. For a push saw, you want the saw to be in line with your arm and you want your body out of the way and you want to be moving smoothly all the way across it so that everything up your arm is in one nice straight line. Whereas for a Japanese saw, if you try and do that, you're going to be, it wobbles. It doesn't function as well, and plus it kind of hurts your wrist. And so the traditional way is more of like a golf grip, like you're going to be swinging, and then to pull towards the center of your mass so that both hands are flexing out. And that takes a completely different mindset and a completely different functionality. And so some people who learn all on Western and Eastern saws really hate Western saws. They just feel bad, they do bad cuts. And vice versa, people who learn on Western saws have problems with Eastern saws. And that then also goes on to planes, and that planes with the Eastern planes, you pull them. It's the same body movement, it's the same muscle group. Some people are going to say you get more strength with a pull stroke than a push stroke, and that's really kind of ludicrous. Other than the fact you're using a second arm to do it, the strength really doesn't matter. It's more about the saw. You're always going to be cutting with the weight of the saw and the function of the saw. You're not going to be putting your force into it. That's bad form. So which is better? Neither. They serve very different capabilities. Sometimes having this saw without a back and a really thin cut makes cutting really easy. I find the Eastern saws to be a little slower in my functionality. They're harder to sharpen. You have to have different tools for them. But 6 of one, half dozen of another. If you're new and getting into it and you like the idea of Japanese, then go for it. Just when you're first getting started, don't jump back and forth between Eastern and Western. Pick one or the other and learn that body mechanic until you can cut straight with that one, and then pick up the other one. Otherwise, you're going to be just really confusing your body, and you'll never get really good with either. It's not a skill that transfers back and forth. So, yeah, that's my take on the matter. I do have a video on that if you want to see, but yeah. Mm-hmm. What you got?
Robert wants to know if your apron is homemade.
No, this is from Loft Block. Loft Block. And I really like it. I don't usually use an apron in the shop when I'm woodworking because it doesn't get that dirty. If I'm turning, I have an apron on, but most of the time you get curls and they don't cause much issue to your body. But for me, I have a microphone, and so my microphone is built into my apron. So whenever I need the microphone, I have my apron on. It just makes it easier for me. If I had a power tool shop, I'd like the apron. It's a waxed canvas that works fairly well. Yeah, have you ever wondered why is sawdust called sawdust when the router makes sawdust and the planer makes sawdust and the joiner makes sawdust? Why don't they call it all these other things? Why is it the sawdust? And the answer to that is, until power tools, only the saw made sawdust. Everything else made curls and chips, which don't cause as much problem. So it's only sawdust. Sorry, side thing I'm very interested by.
That's okay. They're fighting about
Japanese, Eastern, Western.
Well, that and then Darth brought up tails or pins first.
Yes. Tails or pins, if you really want to get a hand tool argument. I do both. Most of the time, I do tails first. I find it easier to lay out tails onto pins than pins onto tails. But I've done both, and I like both, and but it often just depends on which comes to mind first. So yeah, that's one I'm ambidextrous on. A lot of other things I'm not. Uh-oh.
No, some Richard suggested, why not ask Sean from Worth the Effort to join you on your next marathon?
Yeah, Sean, if you want to, that'd be good. Yeah, I should get together with you sometime, Sean. We'd be having a little bit of fun here. And for those of you who don't know, Worth the Effort, he is the reason I'm doing hand tools today. A while ago, I watched him make a video on a grooving plane, and he made a grooving plane in his shop. And it was just an aha moments of, oh, I could do that. And it came right at the right time in my moving around and family. And so thank you, Sean. You're the reason Wood by Wright's here.
Well, I guess I should say thank you to Sean, too. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, we're all
So if you haven't
together.
seen Worth the Effort, go check out his channel. It's got some good stuff over there. A lot of great information. He's also doing like these daily, well, not daily, but almost everyday tips that a lot of great information in those. Sorry, what?
He says piggyback ride.
Yes. There we go. Up the torture.
All right, I think that wraps up the questions.
Cool. Unless anyone has anything last minute, just to say, I am getting the glue test is coming along. I got the frame in, and I've started on it. So Saturday's video, I'll actually be talking about the test itself, going over the different glues and some of the things in that. And I've had a lot of interesting insights and questions, and so I'm hoping to address them all in that. Then, let's see, it'll probably be next Saturday that I'll actually have the glue test all done, all of the tests done. There are 1,280 actual tests to do, and then I have some practice tests that I'm playing with, just so I can learn the system and make sure I'm doing it correctly. So all told, I'm busting off like 1,350 blocks. And each one of them takes 30 to 40 seconds to do. So you do the math, it is a long, long time. Actually, I'm probably going to end up being close to a full minute to do them. So it will take me longer to bust off all these blocks than it took me to run 50 miles. So yes, I'm really looking forward to that one, and I've had a lot of other questions about it. So if you want to see more on that, I put up a video on the Wood by Wright Hive Mind page. So, any last minute questions?
Hang on. There was one. Where'd it go? I don't know. Oh, sharpening with sandpaper, good for beginners.
Sharpening with sandpaper, yeah, works great. In the long run, sharpening with sandpaper is more expensive, and it is it's tedious and can be painful, but it is cheap and functional to get up and going. Works really well. Especially if you go to a 2000 grit sandpaper and then throw it onto a strop, you're golden. You'll get just as sharp a cut as I get on my diamond plates. So yeah, it's well worth it. So that's about it. And
they want to know about the show on Saturday. What time? Eastern time.
Eastern, it'll be noon. So I put out all my videos Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 11 o'clock Central Time, or noon Eastern Time. Except for whatever day I do the live stream, which I'm trying to do one live stream a week now, either on a Tuesday or a Thursday. And I'll be moving that time around, sometimes in the morning like this, so the people in Asia and Australia could stay up a little bit later and watch it, and then sometimes later in the day for Europe, or middle of the day for Europe. And so I'll be doing different times for different peoples. So yeah, looking forward to that. So that's about it for this week, and until next time, have a wonderful day. You can hit the stop button.